Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Kubernetes community meeting. This week, I am your host. My name is Jonas Rosland. I work at VMware, and I'm an open source community manager at VMware. So I'm part of the SIG Contribex together with a bunch of other folks on the call here, and I'm super happy to have you all here. First of all, I want to make sure that everyone understands that this is a community meeting and will be posted publicly on YouTube. So please be mindful that what you say is being recorded. And also, please mute yourself if you're not speaking to be courteous to the other speakers on the call here. Do we have anyone on the call that wants to volunteer to be a note taker for today's call? If you're willing to help out and taking notes, please just speak up. All right.
I'll do the best I can. Let's do it.
All right. Thank you, George. Yeah, so today's call, we're going to go through a release update. We got Tim Pepper on the call here, and then we have 3 SIGs who will be giving us some updates. It will be SIG Cloud Provider with Chris Hoge. We got SIG Architecture with Jace. We got SIG API Machinery with Daniel. Then we have a bunch of announcements regarding an election update, the Kubernetes Contributor Summit, and the Contributor Survey, and of course, the weekly shoutouts. So let's dive right into it, and I'm going to hand this over to Tim Pepper with the SIG release.
Hi. So the 112 release is starting to shape up this week. We went ahead and announced earlier this week that we were going to delay 2 days. We had quite a few issues as the week started that were kind of troubling, but a big thank you to everybody in the broader community who's really helped focus in and whittle down these last issues. I think we have one outstanding really right now that we're trying to triage. And if we can get a fix in today, tomorrow for that, then we'll have kind of the weekend for test to soak and hopefully give good, clean CI signal. Basically where we are, we'll be thawing master. The expectation is on Monday so that 113 can commence, which is exciting there. And then Thursday, the 27th of September should be our final release then for 112.0. And that's basically it. I did also note, since we haven't had updates on the patch releases for prior updates, just kind of an FYI, the 1, 9, 10, and 11 dot releases from the last few weeks I put in the meeting notes there. And that's it from me.
Great. Thank you so much, Tim. So let's move over to some SIG updates. First up, we have SIG Cloud Provider with Chris. Chris, are you on? Doesn't look like Chris is on yet. So Jace, do you want to start us off with SIG Architecture?
Sure, glad to.
Thank you.
I'm also, I just noticed that we have all the release managers back to 1.8 on the meeting today, which is kind of fun. Some history there. So I'm Jace Singer-Dumars. I am co-chair of SIG Architecture, and I work at Google. And if you go to the meeting minutes for the community meeting, it's bit.ly/Kate's community. We'll get you there if you're not there already. And basically, just going over a little bit about what SIG Architecture does and what we're trying to accomplish over time, which is primarily to manage and maintain architectural consistency. And that gives us sort of a long haul view of what design decisions are in Kubernetes and how do we maintain a logic that if you walk into the project a year from now, it makes sense to somebody who's in it now, and trying to make sure that the decisions that we make, it's sort of the sum of a lot of small decisions add up to big decisions. So that's really what we're watching and maintaining. So we do manage a few sub-projects. We're still in the process of defining these. We're one of the latecomers to getting a charter in place, partly because we have a pretty complex umbrella of things that we manage. And what we want to make sure is that our sub-projects make sense. Right now, the ones that are pretty clear to find is the API review process. And basically that's reviewing any API changes and new APIs, and also as a sort of API review as a service for people who are writing CRDs that want to get expert input from the API review team. And so I think that's a really great service, and people who are interested in learning more about APIs can track those issues. And those issues are all on a project board, and that is how we manage our work for the most part. So if you've not seen GitHub project boards and are familiar with Kanban boards, essentially it's a way of tracking work and showing two things. One is that there's a vertical column of cards, and essentially if you're doing it, if you're maintaining the board regularly, those cards should be stacked in rank order. So basically the things at the top are the things that are going to move to the next state the fastest. So it gives you a really quick glance. You can tell what the prioritization is of any particular phase of work, and also what the phases of the process are. So if there's, say, a review phase or an approval phase, those things should all be represented as columns. And you'll see in our project boards for SIG architecture that each process has its own different states. So another one that we are responsible for is the KEP process. And it's a little strange because KEPs are technically pretty project-wide. So SIG PM, SIG release, SIG architecture all have stakes in KEPs. In fact, the whole community does. But from an oversight perspective, SIG architecture is really responsible for keeping an eye on those, making sure that as people introduce new functionality into the ecosystem, that it fits with what we're trying to accomplish architecturally, and basically just providing that top-level oversight of what enhancements are being introduced into the project, and also that the project has a same process around KEPs. So we're really trying hard to find ways to improve that and make it more consumable. So hopefully there will be some updates soon about some enhancements to the KEP process. So we'll let you know on that. Conformance tests are another thing that we manage. Conformance is an interesting thing because it's really the concrete definition of what Kubernetes is. We talk about it from architectural layer standpoint, but really when it comes down to it, conformance tests are one of the best ways to consume what actually is the functionality that should be provided in any Kubernetes cluster. So those are the sub-projects we manage. We also have sort of policy and governance aspects. So I mentioned APIs, and so we do have API governance. So we're really responsible for helping to maintain the guidance and review process for APIs, the deprecation policy, code organization, generally speaking, the KEP process, and just general issues around Kubernetes scope. Pretty much if you have a question about what is or isn't in Kubernetes or sort of those long-term plans, definitely go to one of the SIG architecture meetings, which happen every Thursday after this meeting, so immediately after. And just connect with people, and it's a really great community, and we're happy to answer questions. And just as a sort of point of order about how we operate, if you go to the agenda the day before, so basically 24 hours before the meeting, and there's no agenda items, that means that the meeting won't happen. So we're trying to prevent needless meetings that don't have agendas. So just check the day before and make sure that there's agenda items if you want to attend. Otherwise, the meeting won't happen. Yeah, so pretty much that's it. I put a link in the meeting notes for this meeting to, you can look at our agenda and meeting notes that we take there. There's a link to that. And also a link to our YouTube channel. So we are very diligent about recording and posting our videos of our meetings. So I don't believe we've missed any in the last year or so. So you can pretty much catch up to everything that's happening at any given moment via the video playbacks. So pretty much it. Any questions? All right. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand it back to Chris.
Hi there.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Chris.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. So my apologies for arriving late to the meeting. For some reason, the community meeting dropped off my calendar. Yeah. So I've shared a link to our slides here. Does the presenter want to show those, or can I share my screen to show those?
I can share it.
Okay.
Give me 1 second. Can you all see this?
Okay, so yeah, my name is Chris Hodge, and I'm with SIG Cloud Provider. I'm a co-lead of it with Jago McLeod and Andrew Sai Kim. We're relatively new, and I think this might be our first community update, actually. If we go to the first slide, so one of our primary goals is to be able to the scope of the SIG is to help manage all of the individual cloud providers in producing code that is consistent and reliable and adheres to a minimum standard. Part of the reason why SIG Cloud Provider arose was out of a need to, we were looking at a number of cloud providers who were upstream in the Kubernetes code base right now. And so these include GCE, Azure, AWS, and OpenStack. But we have a policy: we don't want more cloud providers in upstream code. But we also want to create a level playing field so that everybody, all of the clouds who want to participate and want to have a provider, are on an equal footing as to all of the others. And so this means that we have a number of short-term goals, including creating and maintaining repositories for all of the external cloud providers that interact with the Cloud Controller Manager, as well as removing all of the entry providers from within the Kubernetes code base. And so, so during the 1.12 cycle, some of our major accomplishments, included continuing the formation of this group and the organization. And we've started adding new cloud providers to the Kubernetes organization. And so these include Alibaba, which has been added recently, but also DigitalOcean and Baidu. And part of, we're setting requirements that, minimum set of requirements to add the new providers. And so, these include things like making sure that they're documented, making sure that they are posting conformance test results to test grid, and really making sure that when users come and they find a cloud, when they find provider code to be, that they can use with Kubernetes, that they have, a minimum set of testing and documentation and assurance that they're going to have a positive experience out of it. Additionally, we've started some initial work in removing the entry providers. We've formed a cloud provider extraction working group. These are biweekly meetings. These are biweekly meetings, Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific time. In fact, we're having one of the meetings today if anybody is interested in joining that. And we've started that. Walter is doing, a huge amount of the work that's happening on this, and has produced a document, for example, a working document for GCE that demonstrates the scope of work. One of the issues that we're facing with the entry cloud providers is, to varying degrees, they have used internal APIs, and so APIs that aren't in staging. And this means that you just can't pull the code out and expect it to work without potential future breakage, because internal APIs aren't guaranteed to exist, only APIs in staging. Or the providers have to vendor Kubernetes into their code to be able to be, to ensure that there aren't going to be breaking changes. So the scope of work is really, not just removing the code, pulling the code out, but also identifying the APIs that need to be moved to staging so that the providers can depend upon that in a reliable way, and also making them stop depending upon the internal APIs where we can't move them to staging. And so it's going to be a significant amount of work. And if we move on to the next slide for our 1.13 major goals. So we're going to continue this work to remove the upstream providers. So as I mentioned before, it includes identifying internally used APIs and refactoring them. It's going to be various levels of work amongst the different providers. But the short-term solution we have is to extract everywhere it's possible and vendor Kubernetes within the provider. And so taking care of this internal work that needs to happen within the Kubernetes code base shouldn't hold up the larger work of extracting a lot of the code and making it so that we don't have any in-tree providers anymore and that they're all external providers. We've also been working on the documentation to, for how external cloud provider usage is used. Our initial review of that indicates that the documentation is pretty good, but that is something that we as SIG cloud provider want to take responsibility for helping to, along with the other SIGs that are producing the external provider, to be able to maintain this document and ensure success for all of the users. One of the primary issues is there's a little bit of a chicken and an egg problem where before, when you ship Kubernetes and there's a provider in place, you can just flip a switch and it's enabled. Now you have to load a control node, load the control plane, on a provider, and then pull the provider in and load it, and load it in. And so there may be, there are a few steps involved to make sure that the provider is enabled and, being able to access resources. Other things are also, ongoing discussion about, considering rehoming all of the providers into a new SIG cloud provider organization. It's probably likely far beyond the scope of the next release cycle and is, really something that's a much larger community discussion. Within the slides here, we have a link to that discussion on the SIG architecture mailing list. And kind of the final thing that we need to do in 113 is continue to collect conformance results from all of the providers. And so we have a KEP for this in place, as well as a link to the test grid for all of the providers who are currently submitting conformance test results. Moving on to the final slide. So SIG Cloud Provider, it touches a lot of other organizations within the community. And we have some pretty strong collaborations going on. As mentioned before, we have SIG testing, where several providers are working with SIG testing to report results back to test grid. SIG architecture, where we're continuing discussions on how to extract the in-tree providers and what those APIs need to look like, as well as discussing the disposition of external provider code. SIG docs, which is a large effort on ongoing discussions on how to pick the right solution in other pages. Primarily, SIG docs would like to not be responsible for documenting how all of the providers work. It's far beyond the scope of what they are, what their mandate is. It's beyond their expertise. They shouldn't be expected to understand how all of these providers work. And so SIG Cloud Provider is really working towards, again, building a standard of what common documentation should look like for enabling and using provider code, and what individual documentation should look like from each provider and a minimum standard for that. As well as we started working with SIG Cluster Lifecycle, which shares a very similar goal, where Cluster Lifecycle is interested in how do you deploy and manage a Kubernetes cluster, taking advantage of the different resources that are available for provider solutions. So we've been working with them on making sure that we sync up on creation of repositories for cloud providers, as well as providing support where we can for communicating with the individual providers. And I think that wraps up our update. I'm happy to take any questions about the work that's doing or how to get involved.
Awesome. I think this is great. Do we have any questions? I do have one question here. You talked about rehoming all providers from into a new SIG cloud provider organization. Can you talk a little more about why you're doing this and why that would be important?
Well, this is actually a huge discussion that's happening right now. And it really, boils down to the existential question of what is Kubernetes. Is Kubernetes a kernel that provides a minimum set of functionality that lets you do a number of things, and then you plug into that, you bring your own things to plug into that to hang off of that functionality. Or is it, or are the cloud providers themselves a core set of that functionality, something that is absolutely required for Kubernetes to be able to operate and be able to work, and that everybody expects will be there. And it's hard to capture the full, or is it a collection of APIs that we interact with? As Josh is pointing out in the chat here, and that affects the disposition of where that code should live and who should have responsibility for it. I think that talking about that in the community meeting is, like, especially in an update like this, is well beyond the scope, of the update itself. But I think the discussion in the SIG architecture mailing list is a good place to start. In our SIG cloud providing meeting yesterday, which we hold every other week, and so it was an on week this week. You can also review some of the discussion that we had there, because I think that there are a lot of differing opinions on it, and there's really not, that decision as to where things are hasn't been made yet. For the time being, we're bringing in new cloud provider repositories into the Kubernetes organization. I mean, that's our current plan for right now. And that decision is based on making sure that right now there's there is an imbalance between the in-tree providers and the out-of-tree providers, and we want to make sure that everybody is being brought to the same level playing field. And that's the solution we have right now. We want to make sure that we're not short-circuiting any of those decisions while this is being discussed.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, I've got another question. Where can I find a link to that cloud provider extraction meeting that you said was on at 11 a.m. today?
Yes. Let me see if I can. Let me see if I can find the link to that.
Anyway, you don't have to do it right now, but maybe if you could either put it in the cloud provider Slack or I looked there and I looked in the mailing list and didn't see it in either one of those.
Yeah, I will actually, so I will drop the Zoom link into it right now, which you should be able to. So that's
okay.
That's at 11 a.m. Pacific time, so that's going to be coming up soon. But I'll send it out to the SIG cloud provider mailing list also, with times and more information.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Next on the agenda, let's see here. Next on the agenda, we have SIG API machinery with Daniel Smith.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Hi, Daniel. Yes, we can.
Okay. I thought of a bunch of things to say while I was sitting here, so we'll see how many I get to. I thought first I'd start off with what's going in the ongoing release. We have dry run in alpha, so you can now send an API request, and the server will, instead of actuating that API request, tell you what it would have done if you'd sent it for real. So we expect this to help people predict the outcome of their actions. It's not like a contract with the server. Like if you do a dry run create, you're not going to get the same like UID or the name if you use the generate name feature. But you'll be able to test your API to see like what is it going to look like when it runs through the webhooks, and all that stuff. So that's an alpha. We're pretty excited about that. We were also going to put out a CRD versioning change. So last release, we have a CRD version. You can add more versions to your CRDs, but each version must be like, there's no schema change allowed. So we planned to add a schema change. And we got bogged down a little bit arguing about how the API should work. So that's pushed off to the next release. But expect that in the next release, I would say. And that's going to let you register a webhook to do a schema transformation for you. So you'll be able to bring old clients and new clients for your CRDs. I mean, I would say our eventual goal is for all the various ways of API definition to have roughly the same feature set. So like whether you're choosing aggregated APIs or CRDs, you're choosing that based on, do you want to write a custom storage implementation, and not on like, do you need some sub resource or something that is relatively easy for us to do. Let's see, I thought I'd put a note in here. The SSH tunnels are going away. This release is the last one that we expect to include them. They've been deprecated for a year, so yeah, just if you depend on them, watch out. I thought I'd give an update on apply. We've been working for a while to move apply to the server. We're doing this in a feature branch. Antoine, Jenny, and I, or the people who've been working on this, have been having a few meetings over the last week to figure out what's our remaining steps to exit the feature branch and get this merged in a alpha quality, so that we can, like, you know, do stuff in master. The feature branch is kind of nice because we can write code now when we're frozen, but also clearly we have to get out of the feature branch before people will actually be able to use this. So look for some more complete designs from us. I don't know when we'll get those out, but hopefully soon, maybe by next week. And then I just thought of some general informational things about SIG API machinery that almost always bear repeating. We don't own your API. You can ask us for an API review, and we'll probably have opinions, but we're not the API reviewers. I know it's confusing because I'm in both groups, but SIG API machinery doesn't own most APIs in Kubernetes. It is a little confusing because we do own some APIs. So I would say the metadata that's in every object, like the format of that, I think API machinery owns that because it's very general. We own the CRD API, obviously. Then we own all the like webhook interface APIs, like the communication to dynamic emission webhooks. We own the API between, well, calling it an API may be generous, but we own the communication between the aggregator and all aggregated APIs. We own the storage interface. It's not really a real API at the moment, but if it were an API, we'd own it. That's the communication pathway between API server and etcd. And we own some controllers in the system that actuate general things about Kubernetes. So like the garbage collector, the namespace controller. I'm probably forgetting a few. I'd count the quota controller in that category, because that's sort of mostly just counting resources. The part that's specifically about adding up how much CPU and RAM people have requested, that's pretty Kubernetes specific and not really API machinery. So I don't know, maybe that's a little mixed up. And then I think what could even argue that we own the RBAC API, and that obviously the authsig owns that more directly. But if you were to think about Kubernetes in terms of what is API machinery specific and what is Kubernetes cluster specific, like RBAC clearly goes with the API machinery. It's much more general than like pods and nodes. Let's see. And I would even go so far as to say we own the like the controller shell, like the like when you implement a controller, the informer and the reflector and the shared informers, like all that stuff that you glue together to build a controller. We own that, and I'd even extend that to the controller manager binary, because I don't know. I've never been able to figure out who owned that, so I just decided that maybe SIG API machinery owns that. Okay, so hopefully that will help you better figure out whether you should tag SIG API machinery on your PR. I know we are at the top of the list when you look for SIGs, but that's just because of the English language. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to assign it to us. Let's see, and forward thinking, like what else besides CRD version stuff should you expect from us in the coming releases? I think top of my list is maybe rate limits, flow control. Like we don't have much defense against some actor in the cluster consuming all the API request quota and like starving the other components. So we need to have a system that balances like making sure everybody gets their fair share, that still recognizes that some components are more important than other components. Like if you starve your scheduler, that's probably not good. If you starve the kubelets reporting the node status, that's even worse, because then the node controller will come in and delete some pods that you probably didn't want deleted. So it's going to take some engineering to figure out how to do that safely. I'd also like to solve some problems around internal API server coordination when you're running more than one API server. Like if you install a CRD, how do you know when every API server is serving the same version of the CRD? Right now, we don't have a good answer for that. And there's a number of things that have that same problem. Finally, I'd just say one thing about our SIG meeting and agenda. We've been, just to echo what Jay said a few minutes ago, if it comes to Wednesday morning and we find that our agenda document is empty, then we will probably cancel the meeting. So it really helps to know in advance what topics we're going to discuss, so we can make sure the right people are there. So if you want to have an item discussed, like there's a calendar reminder on Tuesday if you sign up for our SIG mailing list. That tells you when the agenda closes. It's very generous. It goes all the way to Tuesday afternoon. So make sure your agenda item is on the list by then. Okay, I think that's everything I wanted to talk about. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Daniel. So I have a quick PSA, public service announcement. I've heard a lot of talk regarding the calendar and making sure that you have all the meetings on your calendars. So one of the things that you want to make sure you do is look at the notes for this meeting. We have some instructions for the calendar there, and that's the Kubernetes community calendar. Make sure you subscribe to that calendar. Don't copy over items, because they will fill up your calendar. Don't copy over things, just subscribe, and I put some screenshots in there on how to actually do that as well. That way you have a separate calendar for all the Kubernetes community events and meetings, so you can easily track them, and it keeps them updated as well. So if a Zoom URL or something else changes, or a time changes, you will automatically have an updated calendar. So that's the quick PSA here. And next up, we have George, who is going to talk about the election update.
Hi, everybody. I'll go as fast as I can. I'm George Castro. I'm one of your election officers, along with Paris Pittman and Ihor Dvoretsky, both who cannot attend this meeting. The first thing is a link to all the info you need. I sent the election announcement yesterday to Kubernetes-dev if you want to click through the link. So far, we have 677 people who are eligible to vote, and so far 144 of you have voted. If you're in voters.md, that's the file with your GitHub handles, whether that says whether you can vote, and you have not yet received a ballot, please send us a mail at community@kubernetes.io, and we'll send you a ballot. There's some guessing that happens here because we don't have an exact mapping of your GitHub handle to email addresses. So usually the ones that we're catching now are people who might have recently moved jobs or things like that. So by now you should have received a ballot from the Civ system, and if you have not, please send that mail and we will process that as quickly as possible. And a reminder, the election ends on October 3rd. Next, the Kubernetes Contributor Summit is actually happening. This is the day before KubeCon in Seattle. Click through that information there. We'll send you to a GitHub page that's kind of talking about what the Contributor Summit is going to be. The second link there is one I need help, especially from those of you that are planning on attending, leads, tech leads, people who are planning on attending the Contributor Summit. Last time we kind of did basically a huge version of this meeting that everyone's doing status updates. This time we got a lot of feedback that people want to hear more things about sustainability as a project and health. So what we're going to do is in the morning, it's kind of going to be like a topic one-to-many discussion. For example, Sig Arch is going to go first and talk about sustainability of the project, kind of overarching terms as opposed to just giving status updates. And then the afternoon will be an unconference. We're still looking for topics for those. So if you're looking to attend the Contributor Summit, please please check out that document. There's a checkbox when you register for KubeCon that will say whether you want to go to the Contributor Summit or not. But these events will be attendee limited because we're expecting something like 8,000 people at KubeCon, and obviously we can't have them all come to the Contributor Summit. So please register early so you can get in there. Josh, do you want to say anything about the Contributor Social for Shanghai, those of you that are attending?
So like I said, we got that booked. We're not having an existing contributor summit for Shanghai as planned because we don't think there's going to be that many ongoing contributors attending Shanghai. It's going to be a smaller event. However, we will have a social that evening, which will include the new contributors and existing contributors. We are going to have a panel run by Pooja, which is going to consist of Chinese contributors, both in China and living abroad, talking about contributing to Kubernetes while Chinese as a discussion thing. So if you are going to Shanghai and you're arriving sometime during the day on the 13th, which would be a good idea if you are going to Shanghai, or even earlier, please join us for the Contributor Social.
And one thing I should have been clear on, the Contributor Summit in Seattle is going to be in 2 parts. Those of you that attend this meeting will probably go to the existing Contributor Summit, which is going to be the unconference and the one of many talks I talked about. But for people who are brand new to the project but want to learn how to contribute, we will have a separate new Contributor Summit, which is the usual Gwen and Josh show of how to get you started with your first pull request, how to sign a CLA. So we're gonna try. We have 2 tracks there, one for existing contributors and one for new contributors. If you have any questions, ping us in the SIG Contributor Experience Slack channel, and we'll be happy to help you. Speaking about SIG Contributor Experience, the contributor survey is out. This is part of the SIG Contributor Experience charter that we will basically ask Kubernetes contributors every year how things are going. How you answer this survey as a contributor will basically determine the things that SIG Contribex will focus on over the next year. So if you have any positive, bad, neutral, whatever experience, we're looking for it all. So please click through that SurveyMonkey link and give us as much information as you can. That would be really great. Hacktoberfest, we're sort of doing this. This is something that's sponsored by DigitalOcean, where they grab new people who want to get started in open source and ask them to contribute to a whole bunch of open source projects. I am putting together a list of broken 404 links in some of our properties to kind of give them a place to go. I know some people have strong opinions about having people doing trivial pull requests, so we're going to try to intercept that by giving people something that's easy for them to fix and without hopefully causing too much havoc. But don't worry, I'm working with the GitHub org admins for Kubernetes to make sure that we don't spam everyone. So hopefully that will go great. Any questions about that? Looks like no. So next, SIG Leads, we put together some recommendations for how to give an update for this meeting. So some people say, hey, do I have to have slides or not? What should I be talking about? So we went ahead and pulled requests. It was actually a while ago. We just forgot to tell you. Sorry. So from now on, when it's your turn to give a status update during this meeting, the host will kind of remind you where these are, and then you can tailor appropriately. And last call for outreach intern requests. I don't know who added this bullet if they want to talk, but that's it for me. Over to you, Jonas.
All right. So last topic of the day here is the shoutouts. So shoutouts is a thing where we shout out to people that have done amazing things in the Kubernetes community. So we use the shoutouts channel on the Kubernetes Slack for this. So if you have any shoutouts to any individuals or team members that you're really, really thankful for their work, make sure you send out one there. So the first one is from Vlad Schlossberg. He wants to give a huge shout out to George. Let's see here. George, Mr. Bobby Tables, Paris, and Hubert Chen, and a bunch of others for helping make Focal a success. Now, the Focal bot that we talked about in the last community meeting. Working with me on feedback, helping promote the project, submitting helpful answers, and everything else you guys have done. So really good shout out there to a major portion of the community, and thanks to everyone that have answered questions and filled up the focal bot there. Next one is from Ben the Elder. He wants to give a shout out to Mr. Hone for being eternally responsive to networking issues on everything from PR reviews to SIG network test configs, DNS images, the network end-to-ends, and answering questions related to network issues in the infra and helping debug. Thanks for helping get the kubedns manifest images out the door for 1.12. Xiong is always fixing things for us over in SIG testing and now over in SIG release. So really nice one there as well. The next one is from Nikita Raghunath. She wants to shout out to Carolyn, let's see, that would be Carolyn Van Slick, for creating lots of help wanted issues on the service catalog, and also having an excellent strategy of doing that. She calls it the M&M strategy, where she put out a bowl of M&Ms for every good first issue that she creates. She eats 3 blue M&Ms, and she goes into detail on this in the Twitter, in the tweet that's in the notes there. The last shout out here is from Devanum Srinivas, who wants to give a shout out to Fabrizio Pandini for testing all the things, version 1.12 RC1 kubeadm under various scenarios. So big shout out there as well. All right, and I think that's it for today's meeting. Do we have any other, any last questions, any feedback, anything like that? All right, then I consider this meeting adjourned, and I want to thank everyone for coming to the Kubernetes community meeting today. Have a great week, everyone. Bye.